Unemployment, bankruptcy, homelessness, a global economic crisis. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic about our global economic recovery? Exploring the impact and seeking solutions, United Nations University presents UNU Conversation Series, The Economic Crisis.
Welcome to this edition of the UNU Conversation Series on the Economic Crisis, organized in connection with the June 2009 UN Conference on the World Financial and Economic Crisis and its impact on development. I am Jean-Marc Coicaud from the United Nations University, and with us here today we have Mr. Georg Kell, who is the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact. So Georg is here with us today to talk about how the current crisis relates to the work of the UN Global Compact and what it means for the present and the future of corporate social responsibility. So Georg, thank you for being here with us today. And so, as a way to start our conversation, a very simple question: how is the current crisis affecting the nature of your work at the UN Global Compact?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's much appreciated. It's a very important issue which many people all over the world are busy with coping, so to speak. There's a short answer to your question and a little bit a longer one. First, a short one. Overall, the financial crisis has put the spotlight on all the issues we have been advocating for the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. Ethics, responsibility, values, long-term versus short-term. So, in a way, the crisis has steered up all these issues. It means, on the corporate side, that many companies which now are actually struggling to survive are tightening their belt. They are cutting a lot of their social investment dimension. So philanthropy overall is in a decline. Mm-hmm. I think
corporate philanthropy.
Corporate philanthropy. However, the search for values and ethics is on the rise. Mm-hmm. So what you see here is really a fallout between two different aspects of corporate engagement. Mm-hmm. One is the philanthropic engagement, which obviously is suffering, and there are many figures and surveys on that already. But what is not suffering, what is actually increasing, is the search for sustainability, for ethics. These issues are back because the accusations, of course, rightly have been irresponsible behavior, then executive pay, the whole debate about the role of private sector, the fact that governments have taken over such big shares of the economy raises the bigger issue of the role of the private sector.
Precisely, before we go back to the rise of ethics in the context of this crisis, in a few words, tell us precisely what is the mandate of for the audience which maybe doesn't know about it. So tell us a bit about the mandate of the UN Global Compact and what have been the main points on which you have been working in the past 10 years.
The Global Compact for the past 10 years has been advocating universal principles in the area of human rights, workplace, decent workplace conditions, the environment, especially climate these days, and anti-corruption. These are the four issue areas which the United Nations actually has embodied in frameworks and conventions. And the Global Compact is a call to action, calling on business to say, look, in today's interconnected world, you also should adhere to these principles and give them operational, practical meaning. The Global Compact invites CEOs at the leadership level to commit to these principles, to make them part of their business operations, and to undertake partnership in support of UN goals.
So it's a way to bring together the private sector and the international public sector.
Yes.
How many companies?
5,200 corporations from 135 countries organized in 80 country networks. These country networks... 5,300.
And including the top companies in the world.
Yes, half of the global 500 corporations roughly are in it, but we also have many SMEs. We are geographically well distributed, OECD countries, non-OECD, East and West. Corporations, by the way, when they join the initiative, they also commit to publicly, once a year, make public progress made on implementing this commitment. We call it a communication on progress. And this communication on progress is the public accountability part of the initiative.
So beyond signing on to these principles and the implementation within the framework of their work, I mean, do you have any other set of activities?
Yes, we have global working groups on core issues. Right now, a very big one on climate change, caring for climate, one on water, the CO water mandate. Then we have board working groups on the core issues, on human rights, on workplace and anti-corruption. These are working groups involving 2-3 dozen companies with board members who are kind of chairing these working groups. And then the results are new initiatives which then are brought to scale through the country networks.
So you have also concrete initiatives
Yes.
meant to generate added value on the ground.
Absolutely.
And is it something which is growing?
Absolutely. As a proof that the financial crisis actually puts the spotlight on the issues, the number of new companies has almost doubled since the economic crisis has set on. The degree of engagement of existing participants in the working groups has tremendously increased as well. We have many more activities going on now than we had, say, 2 years ago. And that applies to all aspects of our work. First, we thought it's mostly around the environment because of climate change, but it's also true on anti-corruption. We have now 5 sub-working groups just on anti-corruption. One is dealing with disclosure, one is dealing with collective action at the country level. There are some exciting stories going on in some countries where like-minded participants work with the public sector to introduce low corruption or no corruption efficient frameworks. It has increased enormously.
So precisely, you said that there are 2 visible effects when it comes to the impact of the crisis on the UN, the work of the UN Global Compact and so on. One is drying up of corporate philanthropy, and the other one is the rise of concerns when it comes to issues of ethics. So
yes.
Tell us a bit about precisely the rise of ethics.
Yes, I think 2 issues are actually on the rise currently. One is ethics, moral aspects, because the role of the corporation is under scrutiny again from the regulator in the financial domain. It has raised bigger issues about the role of business in society, so it puts pressure on, which we as the United Nations welcome. So we see this as a driver. The other issue in parallel actually is sustainable development, sustainability. It has become a new umbrella for all non-financial issues, not just carbon emissions, climate change in a narrow sense, but also climate impact, because natural resources constraints are increasingly seen as driving the non-financial issue. And only a few years ago, most corporations would not have made the connection between, say, water, access to water in developing countries and their own supply chains. But today this is seen as a strategically important issue. On the ethical side, obviously what has happened in the financial sector, mostly in the US and in the UK, and we have to be very, very careful here in how we cast the financial crisis. I always remind people that the financial crisis was a breakdown of parts of the financial industry. Most corporations which are in the real economy have suffered as much as the poor have, as much as unemployed have in OECD countries. The highly leveraged behavior and irresponsible behavior of parts of the financial industry has spilled over into all parts of the economy. So you have many victims there, to be quite frank. Many SMEs went out of business.
SME stands
small and medium-sized companies, which were not complicit at all in the crisis, but they were victims of the crisis.
And they will continue to go out
Absolutely.
of business for quite a while.
Absolutely.
So precisely in terms of ethics and business, so how is the UN Global Compact working on this connection, ethics and business? What can you do as a way to push ethical behavior? And perhaps first of all, I mean, how do you make the case that ethics amounts to good business?
First, overall, the 10 principles of the compact are non-binding. They are not hard law. There is no enforcement. But because of the crisis, everybody now notices the 10 principles actually matter. So this is why the 10 principles of the compact now are recognized by the outcome document, for example, of the conference which just concluded last weekend.
On the economic crisis, yes.
And CEOs overall recognize that non-financial issues are as important for long-term sustainability as good financial performances. Secondly, the direct connection between ethics and the compact is our 10th principle, which states that you should strive for no bribery, no corrupt enterprise, which is based on sound governance. And this is a direct connection because introducing no bribe policies throughout the global operation is a huge challenge. And bribery and corruption is directly connected to fiduciary corporate governance issues, and therefore is at the heart of what constitutes corporate governance, corporate ethics, and corporate responsibility.
So, but ethics is in a way about doing the right thing, but
Correct.
how do you demonstrate that doing the right thing equals economic or serves economic rationality, economic effectiveness? I believe there is a recent report which has been published recently on the matter. Tell us.
Yes, it's a little bit the holy grail of
Yes.
corporate responsibility,
Yes.
arguing that good business pays off, and over time, good business actually means you're also capable of having sound ethics in place. Or put differently, if you don't have sound ethics in place, your good business will not last. Sooner or later, bad things will happen, and the costs of bad things will damage your brand and reputation and actually undermine your long-term performance. That has always been kind of our gospel, if you so want, our belief system, but the proof of that is
So your philosophy is that bad things end up happening to bad people.
Not only bad things can happen to everybody, because every organization,
but especially to bad people.
Or let's put like this, organizations which don't have good policies in place when bad things happen are hit very hard.
Okay.
Whereas sound organizations, whether public or private, which have good incentives and policies in place, are better equipped to mitigate risks and to navigate, if you so want, the landscape of potential negative things to happen. They can happen anywhere, anytime, whether it's the National Pride Corporation, the Roman Catholic Church for that matter, or the for-profit enterprise. What matters is whether organizations have good policies in place, the right incentives, and when bad things happen, are prepared to act swiftly.
So ethics
basically means
ethical business enhances resilience for companies.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the basic assumption, and the recent study done by Risk Metrics, a very notable New York-based analytical company, analyzed actually our so-called notable performers. These are the ones which are especially good in disclosing progress made. And to the amazement of everybody, actually, it showed that over the past 3 years, they outperformed comparative stock indices by 10%, and especially so since the economic downturn has set in. This suggests the following, and we have to be very careful how we interpret this. It does not say that good ethical companies also are financially good. That causality doesn't work, but it says that you can be sound financially over time only if you're also good ethically. Meaning, in today's world, a successful company needs to have two things in place to work. One is, obviously, it needs a very good business model to succeed. Without that, without financial performance, nothing else works. But at the same time, the company also needs to master what we call non-financial issues. In the absence of the ability to master non-financial issue, you cannot sustain financial success. So the two go together.
And so this is a study that you commissioned a few months ago, and it's the main finding of this study.
Yes.
So is it? Is it encouraging for what you have been doing?
It's extremely
Why
encouraging.
is it encouraging?
Because having been our gospel that in order to be successful financially, you also need to be successful ethically, and you need to engage in initiatives such as the Global Compact has always been our wish, our postulate, and there has been a lot of anecdotal evidence that this is actually true. If you study the history of the most successful companies, the ones which also mastered sound ethics are the ones which usually survive and they can adopt, and the ones which have gone global and are globally integrated and successful are also the ones which are sensitive to different cultures and have the ability to adopt. But this has always been wishful projection. We never had any proof.
And for the first time,
this is the first time that we have some proof. We are careful not to over-interpret it because the sample base is significant. It's 80 companies from 5 continents. So it's pretty robust. The result is stunning. Analysts we have shown it to, they were really puzzled.
But in a way, economic benefits associated with ethical behavior for a company means that this company is betting or going for the long run,
Correct.
for the long term. While companies which and so many of them do, companies which go rogue, in fact, are really betting on the short term.
Absolutely.
So economic reward associated with ethics has also to do with a long-term business plan.
Absolutely. I think we have 3 basic lessons from the financial crisis which our participants widely share. First, the financial crisis is a strong reminder that long-term value creation cannot exist if you are exclusively focused on quarterly profits. So the financial crisis is an opportunity to reorient from an obsession with short-term returns towards long-term value creation. Lesson number 1. Switch from short-term to long-term. How to do it is not easy because much of our financial reward system is still geared towards short-term rewards. That is executive pay.
For individuals.
Exactly. So this is where the investment community is now very important, and our sister initiative called PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, is working on these issues very hard to switch the incentive structure from a short-term to a long-term.
Do you think that there is a chance for this
yes,
to happen?
it's happening already in small steps and in bigger steps, but I just hope that it will happen deep enough to actually have a lasting impact. There's always the risk that once the economy rebounds, these lessons are forgotten because everybody wants to move on as quickly as possible rather than tackling the bigger infrastructural issue. The second lesson, by the way, this is really our narrow agenda, is non-financial issues in today's world are as important as financial issues. You cannot ignore non-financial risks any longer. In an interdependent world, it is of critical importance that you have dedicated efforts to master non-financial issues, environmental, social, and governance. If you ignore them, you will run into problems and you will not be able to grow and you will not have sustainable long-term success. And the third lesson overall in our mind is a general call on ethics to reconnect business with society. This is important again and again. You can never take it for granted. CEOs easily get carried away by chasing profits alone. So the crisis in itself is, I would argue, a welcome reminder on the basic role of business in society. It is not about creating profits for a few. It must be
for the whole society,
creating values for society.
Listening to you and as a way to go back to the issue of long-term, short-term, I mean, it seems to me that it's a bit paradoxical that we transform banks which are committed to really short-term benefits into a systemic risk, and we don't really compute the two things.
Yes.
I mean, we know that these banks are committed to short-term profits, and it is part of them becoming a systemic risk. Why is it that we don't
I would differentiate. I think we have to differentiate here clearly. The banking industry is a huge, and we're really talking about risk-taking of unregulated parts of the financial industry. The great majority of the banking system, loan and saving system, traditional investment banking, actually was not complicit at all in the.
But precisely the ones which are
which are unregulated, unregulated, so-called innovative private equity and so forth.
And they're also partly too big to fail.
Correct.
Which are so committed to the short term.
Correct.
So how do we
Well,
isn't it paradoxical?
the G20 has addressed this, and there are a new legislation is being tabled in Europe, in the US, which tackles these issues. There are several problems which have occurred at the same time. One is that these so-called new innovative products were totally unregulated, and those who were profiting from them actually managed to put the risk dimension to others, to the bailout, to governments. And this is why governments today are the biggest bankers on earth. I mean, they own many of the crown jewels of the financial industry, especially in this country, but not only here. So this is being tackled now, filling the regulatory void, and bringing these unregulated, highly speculative, irresponsible, risk-taking entities of the financial sector under the fold of more balanced risk and opportunity taking. It is being tackled. Will it be tackled fast enough and deep enough? I'm not so sure.
Well, a lot of people are quite skeptical about
it. Yes,
yes.
I share this skepticism to some part, because the world always tends to forget the hard lessons learned unless, you know, we're really forced to swallow the lessons. And if the economic rebound, which everybody wants to happen, happens now soon, then the hard lessons probably won't be digested. And there are many critics out there who say we have not tackled the fundamentals of the systemic risk. The second one is the relationship between financial markets and the real economy. It is no secret that in the past 10 years, financial markets have spinned out of control. They've taken on an overly important role in allocating resources. By some studies, a single physical economic transaction, say a point of trade, import, export, is supported by financial flows that is 250 times as large. That gives you an indication how unproportional the real economy and the financial economy has grown. In other words, the financial world has grown out of proportion and has really overtaken the real economy by a factor of several times of 100. So shrinking the financial world back to its healthy balance relative to the real economy is probably a necessary thing to do. Having said all this, we should not forget that what's really at stake here is to manage also global integration in the future. The thing I'm really worried about is when now critics come up there and speak up and basically cast a negative spell over the entire economy and throw away global integration. I'm very concerned that inward-oriented forces, protectionism is on the rise, that the rule-based multilateral framework of the WTO is no longer being appreciated, that with governments now being such big owners of the economy, the temptation to become nationalist and inward-oriented is really big and could undermine the common good. And these are real risks out there. So we should make sure that when we criticize capitalism, underquote, we only address our criticism to the parts where it belongs to, but we actually protect and strengthen what keeps the world growing and what gives the opportunity for the poor to escape poverty.
So it's going to be part of the agenda of the UN Global Compact for the coming years.
Yes. We have a big summit meeting next year, 2010, and we will bring together these issues, and clearly the big historical enterprise, I remain convinced we are all having a big stake in, is can we make global markets work? This really is the big question. Can we make global markets work so they're based on universal principles, they work to the benefit of the poor, they facilitate integration, and they do not become a source of barriers and exclusion.
Mr. Kell, thank you for being here today. Georg Kell is the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact. We have now reached the end of this conversation. I thank you for watching. I am Jean-Marc Coicaud from the United Nations University, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.